Case 1, Dennis Price, and the death of 4-year-old Derick Jones. The first thing anyone ever said about Derick DJ. Jones was simple. He was a happy, happy kid. He was only 4 years old, full of energy and sunshine, the kind of child who ran toward the people he loved, not away from them. His mother, Anna, had raised him with routine and affection. Most of his short life had been spent beside her, safe in a home where his laughter echoed. But in early August of 2014, she agreed to something she never imagined would cost her everything. She let Derick spend a few weeks with his father, Dennis Price. She trusted that he would be all right. She trusted that a father, no matter his past mistakes, would never raise a hand to his son. Dennis had a history, a long one, old charges, probation violations, domestic incidents, things Anna hoped were behind him. She didn't want to believe he was dangerous. She didn't want to believe the warnings from years before could ever apply to his own child. But once Derick entered that home, the world he knew shifted. Inside the small house on East 42nd Street, Dennis didn't act like a father caring for his son. He acted like a man carrying anger he refused to control. And for days, Derick endured things no child should ever face. A belt hitting his small body, a knee pressed into his stomach, fists striking him again and again. There was another child in the home, Dennis's daughter from a different relationship. She watched it happen. She saw the bruises forming, the way Derick cried, the way he pleaded. Later, in her quiet voice, she told investigators everything. She carried memories no little girl should ever carry. On the night of August 23rd, Dennis finally called 911. He waited. He waited almost 15 minutes while the boy he had beaten lay limp. And when he finally picked up the phone, he didn't mention the days of violence. He didn't mention the fear in the house. He blamed pills. He said possible overdose. When officers and medics walked into the home, they knew the truth instantly. Derick wasn't suffering from medicine. His small body was covered in injuries, fresh marks, old marks, bruises layered over bruises. His rib was broken. His lungs were bleeding inside his chest. There was no accident here, no confusion, no misunderstanding. Derick died at the hospital at 7:45 p.m., and the story he couldn't speak for himself was told through his injuries, through the words of his frightened sister, and through the autopsy that revealed a child who suffered over days, not minutes. The detectives who worked the case couldn't shake what they saw, nor could the community, nor could Derick's mother, who had trusted the wrong man. When the court date came, the jury didn't hesitate. They saw the photos. They heard the testimony. They watched the video interview with Dennis's daughter, her small voice explaining what no child should ever witness. The verdict was clear. Murder. Neglect resulting in death. Battery of a child. Plus a habitual offender enhancement for Dennis's long criminal record, 83 years. When Derick's great-uncle spoke in court, he didn't talk about the crime. He talked about the boy. We're trying to move on while carrying Derick's memory. His voice broke. The room fell quiet, and for one moment, it didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt like a funeral all over again. Today, the family holds on to the good memories, the smiles, the giggles, the little boy with bright eyes who loved life with all he had. Derick deserved safety. He deserved love. He deserved a father who saw him as a blessing, not a burden. Instead, his story became a warning, a reminder that a child's greatest danger sometimes lives inside the same home where they sleep, but his name is still spoken, his picture is still held close, and his family continues to fight for the protection of children who can't speak for themselves. Case 2. Anthony Dibiah and the vanishing of 10-year-old Nakota Kelly. There are moments a parent never forgets. The first steps, the first time their child says, "I love you," the way their laughter fills a home. For Nakota's mother, Haley, those memories kept her going. He was her world, a playful 10-year-old boy who loved superheroes, baseball, football, and fast food trips that usually ended with a toy he didn't need but cherished anyway. He had one of those smiles that stretched into his eyes, bright, wide, and full of life. But on July the 14th, 2020, just 4 days before the tragedy, Nakota said something no child should ever feel. He looked at his mother and said, "Dad's going to kill me." Haley froze. She tried to understand. Was it fear? Was it imagination? Was it something deeper? Nakota wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He said it with the honesty only a child can speak. Haley called DCS immediately. She did what mothers are told to do. She reached out for help, but the system that should have protected her son did not step in. And that Friday, July 17th, Nakota packed his small bag for the court-ordered weekend visit with his father, Anthony Dibiah. Haley hugged him tight. She told him everything would be okay. She didn't believe it, and neither did he. The home he entered was quiet, far too quiet, and the man inside was not the father he needed. Anthony had a long history of trouble: immigration fraud, fake identities, emotional instability, and a fractured sense of reality that had been growing for years. He told people he heard voices. He posted strange messages. And more than once, Haley told DCS what was happening, what she feared would happen. But nothing changed. On the evening of July the 18th, in a small apartment on Indianapolis's west side, the world shifted forever. Neighbors didn't hear shouting. They didn't hear a struggle. But not long after sunset, Anthony made a phone call to a family member. His voice was cracked, strange, shaking in a way that made the listener freeze. "I just killed my son." Those words pushed the night into motion. Moments later, he called a friend, someone who knew him well. What he told them was even more disturbing. He described holding a bag over his son's face, holding it until the boy stopped moving. Somewhere in that apartment, Nakota's favorite toys were still sitting on the floor. His clothes were still folded. His shoes were still waiting by the door. And he was gone. Anthony texted Haley too, a message that pierced whatever hope she had left. "Sometimes I hear voices. My son is in heaven." Those words crushed her. Before sunrise, 2 separate 911 calls came into dispatch from the friend and the relative, both reporting what Anthony had confessed. Police arrived quickly. Inside the apartment, they found blood on the floors, blood on the walls, blood where no child should ever bleed. There was no body, only silence. Detectives searched the rooms again and again. They searched dumpsters, highways, parks, creeks. They kept searching because mothers deserve to know where their children rest. But Anthony wasn't there. He was already fleeing west. Hours later, an alert went out across state lines. Troopers in Missouri spotted his Jeep. When they pulled him over, he was alone. No child, no answers, no remorse. He admitted he took his son's life, but refused to say where the boy was. Even today, Nakota's resting place remains a question that haunts every corner of this story. When the case reached court years later, Anthony pleaded guilty but mentally ill. He spoke of hearing things that weren't real. He spoke of confusion. He spoke of darkness. Haley sat there, unable to breathe, hoping for just one thing. Not forgiveness, not explanation, only the truth about where her son was. But Anthony refused. He kept that secret for himself. The judge gave him 52 years, and many people believe he deserved more. Not just because of the life he stole, but because of the answers he stole too. After the sentencing, Haley stood in front of the press. Her eyes were tired. Her voice was soft. "If he had remorse," she said, "he would tell me where my son is." There's a kind of grief that goes beyond mourning. It's a grief with no final place to visit, no place to kneel, no place to bring flowers or whisper prayers. That's the grief Haley carries. Nakota's family remembers him with baseball gloves, angel wings, drawings taped to bedroom walls. They celebrate his birthday every year. They speak his name so he stays alive in memory. And every time his story is told, someone hears the warning he tried to share. "Dad's going to kill me." He was only 10. He deserved safety. He deserved to run, to grow, to laugh. He deserved a system that listened, really listened, before it was too late. His mother still fights for him, still speaks for him, still hopes one day she will know where her child rests. Until then, his story remains one of Indiana's most heartbreaking reminders of how fear in a child's voice should never, ever be ignored. Case 3. Eliasard Moneus and the death of baby Jacob. There are stories that feel heavy before you even hear them. Stories where the smallest life carries the greatest heartbreak. Jacob was only 3 months old. Tiny, warm, soft-cheeked, and innocent in a way only newborns can be. He didn't know anger. He didn't know fear. He didn't even know the world beyond his parents' arms and the small Lafayette apartment he lived in. His mother, Edley, held him close that Saturday morning. The two of them were watching church online, something she did often, hoping the calm music and scriptures would bring a little peace into a home that had grown tense in recent days. They weren't talking much. She and her husband, Eliasard, had argued earlier that week. Just quiet tension filling the apartment. The kind that settles around people when hurtful words from days before still hang in the air. Eliasard walked into the room. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes told Edley everything. Before she could react, he stepped forward and snatched baby Jacob from her arms. She called after him, but he walked out the door. The minutes that followed felt like hours. She waited. She prayed. She hoped he would walk back in holding the baby, maybe shaken from frustration, maybe angry but safe. Half an hour later, the front door opened again. But there was no baby in his hands. Instead, he carried something else inside him, a storm she couldn't calm. Before she could ask where Jacob was, he came toward her with a wrench and struck her across the head. The world spun. She went down hard. Blow after blow landed before everything turned hazy and dark. Somehow, bleeding, dizzy, barely standing, Edley pulled herself up. She didn't stop to think. She didn't stop to cry. She got into the car and drove herself to the hospital. Imagine that. A mother with a cracked skull, driving, because she thought her baby was out there somewhere in danger. At the hospital, she told them everything, the assault, the fear, the missing infant. Police rushed to the apartment. They searched it top to bottom, then searched it again and again. No baby. A silver alert went out statewide. Jacob's tiny face appeared across Indiana that afternoon. People held their breath. Officers knocked on doors, canvassed the area, checked dumpsters, questioned neighbors, searched fields. Meanwhile, hours passed, and then came the moment no one wanted. Around 5 a.m. the next morning, after dozens of officers had combed through the home, one investigator opened a sealed orange bucket sitting beside the trash can. Inside, submerged head first in liquid laundry detergent, was baby Jacob. The officer froze. Others stepped in. Silence filled the room. No one spoke. It was one of the hardest scenes Lafayette officers had ever faced. Jacob had been right there the whole time, hidden in plain sight. A newborn's body placed in a bucket used for everyday chores, the kind of thing every home has, turned into something unspeakable. When police tracked Eliasard down, he was in Indianapolis, getting a haircut. A haircut, while the entire state searched for his child. He denied everything at first. Said he didn't know where the baby was. Said Jacob was fine. But he wasn't fine. And deep down, they all knew it. Later, when the truth came out in interviews in court, the story was even harder to hear. The attack on his wife wasn't a sudden burst of rage. He wanted to teach her a lesson. He believed she had disrespected him, and in his anger he punished her in the way he believed would hurt her most. This wasn't a stranger breaking in. This wasn't a random act. This was a father choosing violence against the people who loved him. When the case reached court, interpreters stood at his side because he spoke only Haitian Creole. He apologized, saying he lived with pain and regret. He said he never imagined ending up behind bars. But remorse cannot rewrite what happened. It cannot undo the fear in his wife's eyes. It cannot bring back the baby, whose life had only just begun. The judge listened carefully. He acknowledged the guilty plea had spared the community from seeing photos no one should ever see. Then he sentenced Eliasard to 92 years, 62 for Jacob's murder, plus 30 for the attack on Edley. In the courtroom, the air was thick with sorrow. Jacob's mother sat quietly. She survived. She walked into that courtroom still bearing the scars, physical and emotional, of that morning. But she walked in, she lived. And now she carries their son in memory, a tiny boy who deserved so much more than the world gave him. Today, people in Lafayette still remember the silver alert that went out that day. They remember the fear. They remember the heartbreak when the truth was found in that bucket. But most of all, they remember Jacob, a baby who never learned to talk, but whose story speaks louder than words ever could. Case 4. Jeffrey Weisheit and the fire on Hillcrest Terrace. There are tragedies that shake a town so deeply that even years later, people remember exactly where they were when they heard the news. In Evansville, that moment came on a quiet April morning in 2010, when flames tore through a small house on Hillcrest Terrace, carrying with them the lives of 2 children who trusted the man inside to protect them. Alyssa was 8, bright-eyed, talkative, and eager to help others. She loved school and looked out for her little brother Caleb like it was her calling. Caleb was 5, full of energy, always running, always curious, always pulling someone into a game or adventure. Together, the two were the joy of their mother, Christine. They were her world. That night, Christine was at her overnight job, something she did often to keep the bills paid and the house running. She kissed her kids goodbye before leaving, trusting they'd be safe with the man she had been with for years, her boyfriend Jeffrey Weisheit. He told people he loved them like his own. He tucked them in. He said he'd keep them safe. But sometimes love is spoken lightly by people who don't understand what it means. Just after midnight, while Evansville slept, Jeffrey was alone in the home with Alyssa and Caleb. Somewhere between those dark hours, something inside him snapped in a way no one has ever fully explained. He gathered duct tape. He walked through the hallway where the kids' drawings hung on the walls. He opened the door to their bedroom. No one knows exactly what the children said in those moments. If they cried, if they begged, if they called for their mother. But investigators know he tied their small wrists and ankles. He placed something over their mouths to keep them from making noise. And then he dragged them into a closet. Imagine that. The place where they kept toys and shoes turned into the place where their final moments passed. He shut the door. Then he made sure they couldn't open it again. That alone would have been a nightmare. But he wasn't finished. He went through the house with gasoline. He poured it across the rooms where the family ate dinner, laughed, rested, lived. And then he lit the match. It was after 5 a.m. when neighbors heard the explosion, a boom that shook windows and jolted people awake. Flames shot through the roof. Smoke billowed into the sky, turning the early dawn into a scene of chaos. Firefighters rushed toward the home, knowing time was everything. They fought their way inside, searching for anyone left alive. They found the closet and what remained of the children. The autopsy revealed what investigators already feared. Alyssa and Caleb had been alive when the fire started. Smoke had filled the small space where they were trapped. Their final breaths were of heat and darkness, taken while they waited for someone who never came. When the flames rose, Jeffrey wasn't there. He had taken the family's vehicle and fled, driving across the state line until police finally caught up with him in Kentucky 2 days later. There was no relief in his arrest, no sense of closure, just sorrow. The case moved through the courts over the next few years, but there was nothing complicated about the evidence. Gasoline on Jeffrey's shoes, duct tape linking him to the bindings, inconsistent stories that shifted every time he opened his mouth. Some things could never be explained, not by him, not by experts, not by anyone. When the trial came in 2013, the courtroom fell silent as the details were presented. The photos, the reports, the recordings. And then Christine, the mother who had trusted him, spoke through tears about the night her world was taken from her. "He murdered my entire world," she said. And no one in that room doubted her. The jury deliberated quickly. They found him guilty on all counts, and they recommended the highest punishment allowed. The judge agreed. 2 death sentences, 1 for Alyssa, 1 for Caleb, plus additional time for the fire itself. Christine didn't celebrate. How could she? Justice is a word that feels small when you're standing in the shadow of what you've lost. For years afterward, she struggled to keep going, finding herself lost in memories of school mornings, cartoons, birthday candles, and hugs that would never happen again. She tried to leave this world more than once, overwhelmed by the pain, but somehow she kept fighting. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was the memory of her children. Maybe it was the people who stood beside her when she couldn't stand on her own. Alyssa and Caleb are remembered through memorials in Evansville, benches, scholarships, quiet places where people sit and think about innocence, love, and 2 lives gone far too soon. Jeffrey remains on death row, all appeals exhausted, waiting in a prison cell far from the home he destroyed. And every April, neighbors on Hillcrest Terrace still pause when they walk past the empty space where the fire once burned. They still remember the sirens. They still remember the smoke rising into the sky. But more than anything, they remember the 2 little faces that brought light into their mother's world, and how that light still shines in every story told about them. Case 5, Kevin Isom and the Night on Hanley Street. Some homes carry the sound of family, footsteps running down a hallway, a teenager laughing at something on the TV, a younger child humming to herself while getting ready for bed. On Hanley Street in Gary, that was what the neighbors were used to hearing from the apartment where Cassindra and her 2 children lived. They were a family trying to make life work, a hard-working mother, 2 bright kids, and a man who was supposed to love them. On August 6, 2007, the apartment was filled with tension instead of comfort. Cassindra had told her husband, Kevin Isom, that she was leaving him. The marriage had grown cold, heavy, and controlling. She had reached her breaking point. She wanted peace for herself and for her children, Michael and Ci'Andria. Michael was 16, tall, protective, devoted to basketball. He dreamed of playing professionally one day. His room was filled with posters of his favorite athletes, reminders of everything he hoped to become. Ci'Andria was 13, joyful, sweet, always dancing through the house. She was the kind of girl who brought brightness wherever she went. They deserved a life full of hope. But that night, hope had no place inside those walls. Kevin didn't take the news of Cassindra leaving with calm reflection or quiet acceptance. He let rage take over. And when rage takes over a person who's already losing control, the results can be devastating. It was just after 10 p.m. when neighbors heard the first scream. Some thought it was a heated argument. Some thought it was nothing serious. But then came the gunshots, sharp, quick, one after another. Within moments, the truth settled over the complex like a cold fog. Kevin had armed himself with 2 weapons, a .40 caliber handgun and a 9mm rifle. He went through the home room by room. In the living room, he confronted Cassindra. She tried to talk. She tried to steady the situation. But he fired at her again and again, leaving her lifeless on the floor. Michael heard the shots. He tried to hide. He tried to call for help. He tried to protect his sister. But when Kevin came into his room, Michael never had a chance. The boy who dreamed of making something of himself, gone with a handful of bullets. Then Kevin moved to Ci'Andria's room. She hid under her bed. A place that should have been a safe hiding spot for a child became the last place she ever breathed. A neighbor later said they heard her scream, "Please don't shoot me." And then, silence. By the time officers arrived, the apartment was a scene of heartbreak. 3 lives taken by the man they trusted to keep them safe. But Kevin wasn't finished hurting people. He barricaded himself inside. For nearly 9 hours, he kept police at a distance, shouting things that made no sense, shifting between anger and exhaustion. SWAT arrived. Negotiators tried to coax him out. He spoke of guilt, then denial, then self-pity. Nothing meaningful, nothing helpful, just noise from a man who had destroyed his own family At 7:30 a.m., after tear gas was used, Kevin finally walked out of the apartment. He didn't resist. He didn't apologize. He let officers take him into custody as if nothing had happened. The investigation moved quickly. Ballistics matched. His own words from the standoff echoed the truth. The neighbors' calls, the 911 recordings, the shell casings scattered through the home. It all pointed in one direction. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision fueled by anger and control. When the trial came in 2013, it was moved to another county because the case had rocked Gary so deeply. In court, the taped confession from the standoff was played. Family members shared the pain of losing 3 people at once. And when sentencing day came, Kevin showed almost no emotion. The judge handed down 3 death sentences, 1 for each life he took. There was no celebration, only grief. Cassindra's family said goodbye to a daughter who worked long hours to build a better life. They buried Michael, the boy who loved basketball more than anything. They buried Ci'Andria, the cheerful girl who danced through every room she entered. Every year since, the community has held candlelight vigils in their memory. The children are honored with tournaments, plaques, school memorials, reminders of who they were, not how they died. And people still talk about that night on Hanley Street, how quickly a home full of dreams can become a place of devastation, and how the danger wasn't a stranger in the shadows, but the man who shared their dinner table. Today, Kevin sits on death row, far from the apartment where he tore apart the lives of 3 people who called him husband and father. But Gary has not forgotten. They remember the smiles, the laughter, the siblings who teased each other, the mother who worked hard to give them the world. And they remember how fragile peace can be inside a home where love is expected but not given. Case 6, Fredrick, Baer, and the Morning in Lapel. Some tragedies come like a storm, loud, violent, impossible to miss. But others arrive in quiet daylight, slipping into a home without warning, leaving behind a grief so deep it settles into the soil of a town forever. In Lapel, Indiana, that morning was February 25th, 2004. Corey Clark had just begun her day. She was 26, pregnant with her 3rd child, and raising her 4-year-old daughter Jenna in their rural home. Corey was the kind of mother friends admired. Patient, gentle, the type who could calm a crying child with just her voice. She homeschooled Jenna, she cooked breakfast every morning, she kept a warm, welcoming home for her family. Jenna, barely old enough to tie her shoes, was full of excitement about everything, its coloring, dolls, the bright clothes she loved to wear. Her family called her Little Princess. She couldn't read yet, but she knew joy, real joy, and she carried it in her eyes wherever she went. That morning began like any other. But by early afternoon, Corey's husband would walk into a nightmare no husband, no father, no human being should ever have to witness. The knock came around 10:30 a.m. A stranger stood at the door, and a man Corey didn't know. He asked for someone named Destiny. Corey told him she didn't know that person. She tried to close the door, but the man pushed his way inside. His name was Fredrick Baer, and he had spent the night before using meth, a habit that had consumed his life for years. He wasn't thinking clearly, he wasn't himself. But even in that haze, he made choices that led to the kind of horror that scars a family forever. Inside the home, he threatened Corey, took her wallet, took her vehicle keys, and then the situation spiraled beyond what words can fairly hold. Cory fought for her life. She fought for her unborn baby. She fought for Jenna. But Baer overpowered her. The details of what happened next were revealed in court and written in the autopsy reports, but they are too heavy for any heart to carry easily. What matters most is this. Cory's final moments were spent trying to protect her daughter, trying to survive long enough to keep Jenna safe. But Baer found Jenna too, little Jenna, standing alone in her home, confused, terrified, holding on to the last of her innocence in a room filled with danger. He took her life the same way he took her mother's. And then he left, driving away in Cory's SUV, spending her money, and pretending for a few hours that he hadn't destroyed an entire family. At around 3:30 p.m., Cory's husband came home. He walked through the door expecting to see his wife, expecting to see Jenna playing with her toys, expecting the sound of home. Instead, he found silence. Then he found Jenna's small body on the living room floor. Then he found Cory. His screams carried down the quiet country road, reaching neighbors who still remember that sound to this day. Police acted fast. Baer had used Cory's credit card at a store in Indianapolis, where cameras caught him. Officers tracked the stolen SUV. Within 24 hours of the murders, Baer was arrested. He confessed. Every detail, every choice. It was the kind of confession that made seasoned detectives step out of the room to gather themselves. In court, the truth was laid bare. The path Baer had taken toward addiction, the chaos of his life, the voices he claimed to hear, the days he spent wandering with no direction. His legal team argued he'd lost touch with reality. But the jury didn't need theories. They listened to his recorded confession. They looked at the evidence. They saw what he had done. He was convicted on all counts, originally sentenced to death. Years later, his death sentence was overturned. Not because he was innocent, and not because the facts were unclear, but because the court found his legal representation during his original sentencing phase was inadequate. When resentenced, the state chose not to pursue the death penalty again. Instead, he received 2 life sentences without release. But Cory and Jenna's family still live with the wounds. Cory's husband carries memories no person should hold. The sight of the home he once felt safe in turned into a place of absolute heartbreak. Families in Lapel still pause when they drive past the spot where the house once stood. A memorial scholarship keeps Cory and Jenna's names alive. A cross stands near the road, often decorated with flowers. And people still talk about that morning. How quickly a stranger can change the course of a community. How a simple knock on the door can turn an ordinary Wednesday into a day that will be remembered for generations. Cory and Jenna weren't forgotten. Their story is told quietly, with respect. 2 lives that carried light, love, and innocence, taken by a man who walked into their home uninvited and left devastation behind. But the love they shared didn't end with that day. Their family, their community, and everyone who has heard their story continues to keep their memory alive. A reminder that even in moments of terrible darkness, their lives meant something and still do. Case 7. Kyle Parker and the night Shaylyn disappeared. Some stories break a community so deeply that strangers who never met the victim still remember where they were when they heard the news. In Spencer, Indiana, that heartbreak belonged to a little girl named Shaylyn Grace Ammerman, a 15-month-old child with bright eyes, chubby cheeks, and a smile that could soften anyone's heart. Shaylyn was the kind of baby who lit up a room the moment she entered it. She had just learned to walk, wobbling her way from person to person, arms reaching upward. She loved being held. She loved her blankets, her toys, her warm bedtime routine. Her family called her Shay Shay and Little Bean. She was gentle, curious, precious in every sense of the word. On the night of March the 22nd, 2016, the house where Shaylyn slept was full. Adults talked. A few drank. People came and went. It wasn't chaos, but it wasn't calm. And somewhere in that mix was a young man the family trusted, someone they saw as safe. Kyle Parker, a distant relative by marriage. He had been around often. He held Shaylyn before. He had eaten dinner at the table. He wasn't a stranger, but people don't always show the storms they carry inside. Shaylyn was tucked into her crib around midnight. A quiet kiss, a soft blanket, a small hand resting near her face. It should have been another peaceful night. But not long after the adults settled in, someone slipped into her room. No one heard a cry. No one heard footsteps. No one noticed the front door open. Kyle lifted Shaylyn from her crib and walked out of the house, carrying the child who trusted him. Hours later, the house woke up to a nightmare. At around 9:30 a.m., Shaylyn's grandmother, Jessica, the woman who cared for her daily, the one who held her heart, walked into the nursery. She froze at the sight of the empty crib. She checked the blankets, the floor, the hallway. Nothing. Panic started rising. Her voice shook as she called 911. "My grandbaby is gone. Someone took her." Within minutes, police cars filled the street. Then more were called. Then more. By afternoon, the entire state of Indiana knew her name. Neighbors joined the search. People combed through fields, barns, ditches, and woods. Volunteers showed up with flashlights, boots, and desperation in their eyes. But even during those first frantic hours, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was closer than people realized. They looked at everyone who had been inside the home that night. And one name kept circling back. Kyle Parker. His story didn't sound right. He gave different explanations each time he was asked where he had been. His behavior seemed strange, detached, jittery, distracted. He agreed to a polygraph. He failed. Badly. After hours of questioning, something gave way. The truth rose to the surface, and Kyle knew he couldn't hold it down anymore. He told detectives that he had taken Shaylyn. He told them she was gone. And he told them where to find her. The next morning, officers followed him to a remote stretch of woods in Brown County, a quiet, overgrown area where sunlight struggles to break through the trees. They found Shaylyn wrapped in a blanket inside a plastic bag, left on the ground as if she were nothing more than trash. But she wasn't trash. She was a child, a baby, who should have grown up surrounded by love. When police carried her out of those woods, many officers couldn't hold back tears. Some were fathers, some were mothers. All of them felt the weight of seeing a life so small taken so cruelly. The autopsy later revealed the truth about her final moments. She suffered. Her injuries told a story no one wanted to hear. Her family could barely stand. Her grandmother collapsed in grief. Her father wept openly in interviews, saying he would never be whole again. When the case reached court, Kyle Parker avoided a trial by pleading guilty. He cried during the hearing, but the family refused to see it as sorrow, not when the details they learned tore their world apart. The judge sentenced him to 60 years. In Indiana, for this kind of sentence, early release is nearly impossible. He will spend the rest of his life behind fences and locked doors. But that doesn't bring back Shaylyn. Spencer never fully recovered. Vigils were held. Balloons were released every March. A small memorial bench was placed in her honor. And every year, people still gather with candles, whispering prayers into the night sky. Some say the world grew darker the day Shaylyn left it. But her family, especially her grandmother, insists the opposite is true. They say her light still shines in every child who is protected because her story is remembered, in every parent who becomes more watchful, in every community that refuses to ignore danger simply because it comes from someone familiar. Shaylyn's life may have been short, but her impact has been lasting. She was loved. She is still loved. And her name continues to soften hearts long after her last day on Earth. Case 8. Joshua Penick, Samantha Jerrell, and the final night on Meridian Street. Some tragedies arrive with no warning, no storm clouds, no raised voices echoing down the street. Just a sudden, terrible silence that swallows an entire home. That was the case in Jasonville, Indiana, a small town where people know each other by name, where dinner tables sit close to front doors, and where a mother and her teenage son were taken far too soon. Samantha Jerrell was the kind of woman people described with warmth. A mother of 3, a factory worker, someone who carried herself with quiet strength even on the days when life pushed a little too hard. She loved her kids fiercely. She loved loud music in the car. She loved Sunday dinners and moments that made her laugh so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Her oldest child, 14-year-old Gage, was her shadow. He loved fishing with his friends, late-night video games, and the kind of jokes only teenage boys can deliver with perfect timing. To his little sisters, he was half brother, half hero. To Samantha, he was her first baby, the child who taught her how to be a mother. And to Joshua Penick, Gage was a son he couldn't hold on to. Joshua and Samantha had divorced in 2021. Their marriage had been filled with tension, arguments, and long stretches of silence. Samantha had once taken out a protective order. There were moments of fear, moments the family still tries not to think about. But Samantha never stopped trying to co-parent for her son's sake. On the evening of July 26, 2023, Joshua came to Samantha's home on South Meridian Street. He said he was there to pick up Gage for visitation. Samantha let him in. She always tried to keep the peace, even when it hurt. No one knows exactly what triggered the argument that night. Maybe it was about custody, maybe old resentments rose to the surface. Maybe Joshua walked in with anger already building inside him. But what happened inside that home, before the sun came up, would leave the entire community shaken. Sometime in the middle of the night, the yelling stopped. The lights dimmed. And the quiet settled in for hours. The wrong kind of quiet. Family members grew worried when neither Samantha nor Gage showed up to work or school the next day. Messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. By late afternoon, someone drove over to check on them. The front door was locked. The blinds were pulled. When they peered through a window, something felt off. So still, so wrong. A 911 call followed. Police arrived, forced their way inside, and stepped into a scene that would stay with them forever. Samantha and Gage had both been strangled, a cord wrapped around their necks. No signs of forced entry, No signs of struggle beyond what Gage managed in his final moments. The presence of defensive wounds that showed he tried to fight for his life. The Greene County Sheriff later told reporters it was one of the most disturbing homes his team had ever walked into. Joshua was nowhere to be found. Detectives began searching immediately, checking cameras, phone records, and license plate sightings. Joshua's truck had been seen leaving town before sunrise. His phone pinged miles away. Family members received confusing, unsettling texts. The fear was real. Was he running? Would he hurt someone else? Was he planning something more? By the next day, police tracked him to Putnam County, hiding at a relative's home. He surrendered without incident. In the interrogation room, the truth finally surfaced. Joshua admitted he had lost control during an argument about their son. In those few words, he revealed the heart of the tragedy: anger, possessiveness, and a complete disregard for the lives of the two people who once called him family. When the case went to court, the atmosphere was heavy. Samantha's mother spoke through tears. Gage's little sister sat silently beside relatives who wrapped them in protective arms. Everyone carried memories. Samantha's laugh, Gage's smile. Memories suddenly frozen in time. Joshua pleaded guilty in February 2025. On March 17th, he received a 120-year sentence, 2 consecutive 60-year terms, one for Samantha and one for Gage. Before being led away, he said only one thing: "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't bring them back." The judge called the act unfathomable evil, but for the family, the pain remains. In Jasonville, people gathered for candlelight vigils. Neighbors prayed together. Friends set up a GoFundMe to help the 2 surviving daughters, now left without their mother and brother. At Shakamak High School, classmates created a memorial bench for Gage, the boy who loved fishing, who should have had years ahead of him. His friends host a fishing tournament every summer in his honor. They say the same thing every year. If he were here, he'd be right beside us, rod in hand, talking about anything and everything. Samantha's legacy lives on through her daughters, who carry her strength, her kindness, and the lessons she taught them about love. Every tragedy in this series is painful, but this one carries a particular ache. A mother and son taken on the same night, by the same hands, in a quiet town that still lights candles for them. Some stories hurt to hear. Some hurt even more to tell. But remembering their names keeps them alive in the hearts of the people who refuse to let their light fade. Rest in peace, Samantha. Rest in peace, Gage. Your community still speaks your names with love. Case 9, Mitchell Page. The Monroe Avenue Triple Murder. In small towns, people notice small things. A car parked longer than usual, lights on past bedtime, a neighbor's dog left alone at the gate. On Monroe Avenue in Peru, Indiana, people noticed when Mitchell Page's truck was gone, and the house that used to hum with life went quiet the night of July 24, 2021. Jessica Sizemore kept a tidy home and a steady job. She was a mother who loved her children fiercely and had begun to build a life for them. A life that included happiness she hadn't known before. Her fiancé, Joseph Hushbeck Jr., was a steady presence in the house. He worked hard, treated the kids with warmth, and was the kind of man people relied on. Raylyn, Jessica's 5-year-old, loved unicorns and dancing. She called Joseph Uncle Joe and smiled like the sun. She trusted Mitchell as the man who sometimes stepped into her life. He was her biological father, and for a long while, someone she'd known. But trust can be fragile when relationships break. Mitchell had been seeing Jessica earlier, but she moved on and became engaged to Joseph. That change cut deep. In the hours before midnight on July 24th, Mitchell drove to Jessica's house. He arrived with a gun and anger he'd been holding for some time. Neighbors later told police the sounds that night were sudden. A car door, muffled shouting, then sharp gunfire. Mitchell did not come in as a stranger. He walked straight through a life he had once been part of and took it apart in minutes. He shot Joseph on the porch. He stepped inside, aimed, and shot Jessica. Then he walked to Raylyn's bedroom and shot the child there. The three were taken in one sweep, a home filled with plans, laughter, and small, ordinary hopes, emptied by a man who said later he snapped when he saw Jessica with another man. When police arrived, the scene was devastating. 13 shell casings lay on the floor. Wounds showed how suddenly everything had ended. The town watched as officers moved quietly through rooms now echoing with loss. Mitchell fled. He went home as if trying to hide in the place that once held his life, and waited for police to find him. When they did, he surrendered without struggle. The case moved to trial in January 2024. The evidence was strong: ballistic matches, surveillance showing his vehicle, and a history of obsessive messages he'd sent in the days before. The jury heard the details and in the end found him guilty of 3 counts of murder. On February 14, 2024, the judge read the sentence no one wanted to hear, but many felt was necessary. 195 years, 3 consecutive 65-year terms. The court made it clear that taking 3 lives, including a young child's, required the fullest punishment available. Family and friends filled the courtroom. Jessica's surviving children watched as their lives were marked forever by a single night. Outside, neighbors laid flowers and toys at a small memorial. People who knew Jessica and Joseph spoke about their kindness. Children from the neighborhood left unicorn drawings for Raylyn. At the funeral, people spoke of the small things that made them who they were. A mother's laugh, a father figure's steady presence, a little girl's love of dancing. Those memories steadied the town in the weeks that followed. Communities grieve in small ways and big ones. In Peru, the grief was both private and public. The surviving children moved in with relatives. Funerals were held. Funds were set up to help. Teachers and friends tried to offer normalcy in any way they could. But normal did not return in the same way. Mitchell's name is now attached to those 3 lives in a way that will never fade. The judge called the act what it was: a purposeful attack on the family he once lived near. For everyone who loved Jessica, Joseph, and Raylyn, the world shifted that night. And for people who hear their story now, the echo remains. A reminder that the people closest to us can sometimes carry the deepest dangers, and that watching, listening, and stepping in when something feels off are small acts that can matter more than we imagine. Rest in peace, Jessica. Rest in peace, Joseph. Rest in peace, Raylyn. Case 10. Alan Morgan, Mary Yoder, and the Final Days of 4-year-old Judah. In the early hours of October 11, 2021, a call came into LaPorte County Dispatch. The voice on the line was calm, too calm. As Mary Yoder told the operator that her partner, Alan Morgan, had lost his temper and that a child in the home wasn't breathing. What officers found when they stepped inside that small house in rural Union Township would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Judah Morgan was 4 years old, a little boy with curly hair, bright eyes, and a love for anything with wheels, tractors, toy trucks, anything he could push across the floor. He had spent most of his life in foster care with relatives who adored him, a home filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and safety. His foster mother once said he lit up every room he walked into, and he had a habit of humming to himself when he was happy. But in the spring of 2021, despite years of warnings and documented concerns, Judah was returned to his biological parents, Alan Morgan and Mary Yoder. Family members begged DCS to reconsider. They worried that the environment was dangerous, but the decision stood, and Judah went back. Within months, the house became a place of fear. Surveillance cameras inside the home, installed by Alan to monitor the children, recorded some of Judah's last days. The footage showed him in the basement, cold, punished, duct-taped, left without clothes, and beaten. Investigators later said it was some of the hardest video they had ever watched. Judah's siblings later told authorities that he had been locked in the dark for hours at a time, sometimes overnight. They said the refrigerator had a lock on it. They talked about punishments that no child should ever know. On the night of October 10th, everything reached its breaking point. Alan's anger rose again. Judah was beaten repeatedly. To him, this wasn't the home he remembered, not the warm, loving place where he once fell asleep curled up on a relative's shoulder. This home had become a place where he prayed someone would hear him. Around 3 a.m., Mary finally called 911. Officers arrived to find Judah wrapped in a blanket on the floor, covered in bruises, cold to the touch. He had been gone for some time. One detective later said the room felt heavy with sadness, and even the seasoned officers stepped outside afterward to gather themselves. The autopsy confirmed what they already knew. Judah had suffered repeated blows. The injuries were all over his small body. The pathologist said it was one of the worst cases he had seen in decades. Investigators searched the home and recovered the surveillance footage, which told the entire story without a single word spoken. There were no mysteries left, no excuses that could hide what had happened. Alan Morgan was arrested that same day. He later pleaded guilty to murder. In November 2022, he was sentenced to 70 years, a sentence many felt still fell short of what Judah endured. Mary Yoder, who admitted she knew about the abuse and failed to protect her son, pleaded guilty the following year. In January 2024, she was sentenced to 42 years for neglect resulting in death and for abuse of another child in the home. Throughout the case, one voice remained steady. The foster mother who raised Judah for most of his life, Jenna Hullett. She stood outside the courthouse after sentencing, holding back tears as she spoke about the little boy who used to dance in her kitchen and laugh until he couldn't breathe. He was the happiest little boy, she said quietly. DCS gave him a death sentence when they sent him back. Her words struck Indiana like a shockwave. Judah's story sparked calls for change, for stronger oversight, for a system that listens when families raise red flags. Lawmakers debated new proposals, often referred to as Judah's Law, designed to keep children from being placed back into homes where danger lingers. Candlelight vigils were held. Stuffed animals and handwritten notes were left near the foster family's home. People who never met Judah felt his loss as if he belonged to all of them. Judah's foster family still keeps his photo on the mantle, a reminder of love, innocence, and the life he should have lived. They remember the way he would reach up with tiny hands, asking to be held, the way he'd grin when someone played his favorite tractor videos, and how he called the foster home my house. Because in his heart, that's where love lived. His life ended far too soon, but his name continues to shape conversations, change laws, and remind people everywhere that a child's safety depends on adults who pay attention, ask questions, and speak up, even when their voices shake. Judah's story hurts deeply, but remembering him, saying his name, honoring his short life, is how light begins to return after so much darkness. Rest in peace, Judah. You were loved, and you will always be remembered. When we explore stories like these, we walk through some of the darkest corners of human choices. We hear about homes that should have been safe, moments that should have been ordinary, and children who should still be here. It can be heavy, and it can leave the heart searching for something steady to hold on to. But in every story we shared today, there was more than just loss. There were people who loved fiercely, communities that stood together, neighbors who lit candles and whispered prayers, teachers who remembered smiles, family members who held on to photos and memories because letting go felt impossible. These cases remind us of something important. Evil doesn't always show up as a stranger on a dark street. Sometimes it grows inside the walls where trust once lived. And that is why awareness matters. It is why listening matters. Why speaking up, checking in, and paying attention can make all the difference. For the families left behind, justice in a courtroom can only do so much. It can sentence, it can confine, it can label a crime for what it was. But it cannot heal the empty chair at the dinner table. It cannot bring back the laughter that once filled a home. Healing comes slowly, often carried by the people who step in after the cameras leave and the headlines fade. If you've stayed through all of these stories, it means something about you. You don't turn away from hard truth. You care about victims. You want these names to be remembered, not lost in time. So in this quiet moment, let's honor them. Every child, every parent, every life that should still be here. Let's hold space for their memory and for the families who wake up each day trying to move forward. And maybe ask yourself, what does protection look like where you live? Who needs to be checked on? Is there a child, a neighbor, a friend who might need someone to pay attention? Because sometimes compassion doesn't change the whole world, but it might change someone's world. Thank you for listening with an open heart. Thank you for keeping their names alive. And may every story shared today remind us to love a little stronger, notice a little sooner, and stand up when something feels wrong, so no life like theirs is ever forgotten again.